Hey guys, welcome to a new video. In this tutorial I'll show you how to draw, paint and embellish your very own Christmas tree bauble or ornament watercolour painting. The best bit about this one is you can use whatever colours and materials you like to create your bauble. So let's get started. Here's the materials you'll need today. First of all, you'll need some watercolour paper. I've got my watercolour sketchbook here, and this is one that I made myself using Archie's cold pressed watercolour paper. Mine is A5 size, but you could use whatever size watercolour paper you would like. And by the way, in my last video I showed you how to paint those gingerbread cookies, so if you finish this one and you still want to paint something Christmassy, go and check that video out. I'll leave it up in the cards and also in the description. So before we talk about the actual watercolours, let's talk about everything else we'll need for today's tutorial. I've got a few watercolour brushes here, one bigger one for the background and also a sort of medium one, a size 8 round brush, and then a super tiny one for details. You're also going to need a pencil, any pencil will do, and you'll need something round to create the shape for your bauble. I'm using a masking tape roll here, but you could use a bowl or even a compass to create your circle. So let's talk about pens. So we'll be using the pens at the end after all the watercolour is dry to create details and embellishments on our Christmas bauble. I have some gel pens here, a gold and a silver, but I only end up using the gold, and I also have a white Posca pen, but you could even use a white gel pen or gouache or anything you like for your details. I also end up using a micron fine liner at the end as well. You'll need some water pots, and I always have two around in my studio, one for dirty water, one for clean, and something to wipe your brush on as well. So let's talk about colours. As I said in the beginning of this video, you can use whatever colours you like. I chose these colours because I am using this painting to match a colour palette card from my Colour Palette Prompts challenge on Instagram. The paints I'm using are my Kuretake Gansai Tambi watercolours. I will just tell you the colours I used in case you have this set and want to use the same colours as me. So to start off, we have number 68 Blue Grey Deep, number 50 Malachite, 32 Red, number 46 Burnt Sienna, and finally number 11 Natural Beige. I end up using the beige as the main colour for the bauble, and then the red and burnt sienna for the accents on it, and then I used the blue grey deep and the malachite for the background. So I'm just pre-wetting these pans now using my little pipette. You also might want a palette, so I used to enjoy just using these watercolours straight out of the pan, but I find now that when I mix them in a palette, even if I'm not mixing the colours together, it just sort of gives them a bit nicer consistency than when you just take them straight out of the pan. It's time to mask the edges of our paper. So I forgot to actually mention this in the very beginning, but you might want to, if you're using a loose sheet of watercolour paper, take that down to a board or something using artist's tape or washi tape or anything like that, just so you can get a nice clean border on your paper. And we will be using a lot of water for the background, so you'll get a nice clean edge, and also if you tape your paper down, it will prevent it from warping after using so much water. So once you've taped the edges of your paper, it's time to get started with the sketch. Now I am using this masking tape roll to create my circle, and I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I was trying to get it dead in the center of my page, and I'm just using my pencil now to create my circle. You could use anything you wanted depending on the size of the paper you've chosen to work on, and you could even use a compass. That might be a good way to go as well. So one piece of advice for your initial pencil sketch, and that would be to use a really light hand. That way, if you make any mistakes, like I absolutely do, then it's really easy to erase them without leaving any pencil indentations or hard bits that you can't erase on your watercolour paper. So I did just use a ruler to create a nice straight string for my bauble. You don't have to use that, but for some reason I just couldn't draw a straight line. And you don't actually have to draw a straight line, nothing has to be perfect with this, but I just wanted a nice straight line there, so I thought I would use a ruler. So when it comes to the design of your bauble or ornament, there are so many different ideas out there. You could look on Pinterest or any photo reference search website like Unsplash or anything like that to search for different designs. You could even look at your own Christmas tree to see different bauble designs. I decided to go for something quite simple as I wanted to keep it a bit more simple for today's project, but there, like I said, there's just so many different designs, especially on Pinterest, for you to see. So I'm using my ruler here again now just to try and help me keep things a little bit more symmetrical. Usually I'm not too bad at this stuff, but I think it's where I'm recording. Usually things always go wrong when I try and record a video or tell you guys how I do something. So don't worry about getting your design absolutely perfect. Mine isn't. You'll see in a moment when I start adding in the zigzag lines and even this line around the middle now. I end up rubbing this out a little bit in a moment because I want it to be a little bit thinner, but my zigzags are not perfect at all. They don't match up from top to bottom, and that really doesn't matter. This is more of an abstract style, so this is the way that I really like to work with watercolours now, and the one most important thing is just going with the flow and not being too sort of uptight about making things perfect all the time, you know? And that is quite hard, don't get me wrong, because like I said, I am a bit of a perfectionist, so I do find it really difficult to just let go and try not to make things perfect. One thing that I find really helps me with my art is I don't usually have a plan. I usually just start off with a colour palette that I want to work with and an idea, and I go from there. So I didn't know how this was going to turn out, I didn't know how the colours were going to look, but I just went with the flow and I ended up being really happy with the result. But I'm not always happy with the results, that's for sure. Usually I don't like something I've painted straight away after I finished it, and then it takes a few days and it starts to grow on me a bit, so I think I'm just the sort of person that's quite hard on myself, and I know a lot of you out there are like that too. It's really hard to be an artist and not be a perfectionist at the same time, I think. So I'm nearly finished with my sketch now, and I'm just adding in these little stars onto the background because the background colour I'm using is kind of like a night sky and a bit of a galaxy, and I end up doing some dots on the background. I thought it might be nice to add in those sparkles and create more of a like cosmic vibe to this. So it's nearly time to start painting, but first I'm just erasing some of the pencil lines that I don't want to be there. Once you start watercolour painting, if there are pencil lines that you go over that you don't want to be there, as soon as that watercolour is on there and dried, you won't be able to get rid of those pencil lines. It's like the watercolour just makes them stay there forever. So you do just want to be careful of that, and also this is another reason why it's so important to use a really light pencil sketch in the beginning so you don't end up with any pencil lines left where you don't want them to be. And I do realise I left a couple of lines there that I forgot to erase, but I do go back in and do that in a moment. Here we go. I remembered and I went back in and erased it. I really like to use one of these kneadable or putty erasers, you might call them, because you can do what I just did and roll it into a bit of a sausage shape and then roll it all over your paper to lighten up your entire pencil sketch all in one go. So I got the colours that I want to use for my bauble all prepped and ready to go in my palette, and now I'm going to get started. So the style that I'm using to create this painting is quite an abstract watercolour style, I would say. The whole point of this style is basically leaving white space in between all the different elements on your painting. I remember first learning this from an artist called Kat Cocolette on a Skillshare class, I think, and she learned you how to do this style where you don't let the different elements of your watercolours touch, and it's almost like a sort of stained glass style or a mosaic sort of style, so you leave white space between all the elements on your page, and that way you don't have to let individual sections of watercolour dry before going in with your next element. And I know this style isn't for everyone, but as soon as I tried it for the very first time, I was absolutely hooked, and I don't think I really do watercolours in any other way now, it seems. It's really fun to do this style with different colours and see what happens when you try and drop different colours into different areas on your painting. I know that that's the same with any watercolour painting as well. The magic in watercolour is dropping different colours in with one another and seeing how they mix and seeing how dropping in water reacts with your colours as well. So I do just love watercolours all in all so much, and there's just something about this style that makes me really happy. Also the fact that I'm not really, although I could sit and watch paint dry all day long probably, just because I think it's interesting, especially granulating colours. When I'm actually doing some painting, I like to just sort of get to it and not sit about and keep waiting for different areas to dry. So with doing this style, you don't have to do that. All you have to do is just be careful to not let your different elements touch. But if they do, then that's just a happy accident, and then you might get some really interesting effects that way as well. So it really doesn't matter. And I have had a rule that I have kept the entire time with this sketchbook, and that is anything that happens in here really doesn't matter, and I'm using the entire thing as a complete learning process. And one of my most important things with the sketchbook is to just try and finish all of the artworks. Now there's been a couple of pages where I have just purposely had a play and a practice and swatched out some of my paints, and those are not the pages I suppose I'm really talking about. It's more artworks like this, when even if I get halfway through and I'm thinking, oh, I really don't know if I like this, I must finish them, because then at least I can look back and have a finished painting, and even if I don't like it, I can still look back and think what I do like about it and what I can learn from that one and take with me to future paintings. So I guess what I'm saying here is I really recommend having a sketchbook like this. It's actually really hard for me to fill sketchbooks up. That's why I made it one of my 2024 goals this year. And this sketchbook is going to be the one that I do end up filling up, as I only have a couple more pages left and we still have a good couple of weeks left in 2024 for me to do it. Anyways, I might come back to that tangent in a moment, but I'm actually going to talk about what I'm doing on the paper for a minute, as this is a tutorial video. So this little red line in the middle of the bauble was actually quite difficult to do, just because I was really trying to not touch the edges of the beige that I had already put down. The really good thing about the Kuretake Gansai Tambi watercolours is I find they dry super quickly, and a lot quicker than other watercolours as well. So I didn't use a lot of water with them, which helps them to dry a bit quicker, but I still found it a little bit tricky to not let that red touch. So I do go in and fix a few areas at the end with a white posca pen. If you are doing this style where you don't let the individual sections touch, I can't recommend either a white gel pen or a posca pen or any acrylic paint pen really. I can't recommend it enough, because if you do accidentally touch your lines and you don't really like it, then you can just go in at the end and fix those right up. So I do decide to change to a much smaller brush now. I probably could have done that for that red line going through the middle of my bauble, but I didn't. So at least I do it now and make things much easier for myself. So don't be afraid to change your paintbrush shape up to suit whatever you're doing at the time. So I'm going to go in next to do the zigzag lines, and I decided to use my burnt sienna for that. And yeah, I'm not sure about the colour palette for this at all. I feel like I could have picked a little bit more of a festive one from my colour palettes from the week, but I'd only had time to create 2 paintings from 2 of the palettes, and I usually post 4 every week, but I'm going to change that a little bit in January and for the new year. But this was my favourite one, or second favourite one perhaps, because I loved the gingerbread one that I used last time. And sometimes what I find really interesting when working with colour palettes is it'll look really good for certain things but not so good for other things. So I don't know whether it really suited the Christmas bauble or not. You'll have to be the judge of that and let me know in the comments what you thought of this colour palette. And if you are following along, what colours did you use for yours? I feel like you could use like some really sort of festive colours, like a nice green and red, or you could even use, I mean, for me, if I did this again now, or I might even paint another one before Christmas, I would use like pinks and purples and things like that, and then perhaps a green for the background, so that would insinuate more of a Christmas tree. Whereas this one that I'm doing here kind of looks like just a funny colour bauble hanging in space, but you know, I'm all for things like that, so baubles in space, why not? Okay, so now the bauble is all finished. Well, it's not quite finished, but the first layer is finished, and I'm going to let that dry now while I go in with the background. So I'm getting a really nice thick consistency of my blue-grey deep on my brush, and then apparently wiping it straight off, which is, I hate when I do things like that, because then I think, like, why do I waste so much paint all the time by just wiping it off on my tissue? But I can see here what I wanted to do now, and that is to create a more wet on wet effect for the background. So I'm getting lots of water on my brush here, and I'm only doing sort of half of the background at once, because if I were to mess about and try and wet the entire background in one go, then half of it would have dried before I got to the other half. So now I'm just taking my paint and dropping it into that watery background. So as I said, I'm only focusing on one half at once, and what I'm about to do now is actually something I don't recommend for you to do if you follow along with me. I guess if you're using the exact same colours or paints as me. Because the Kuretake Gansai Tambi watercolours are already pre-mixed, or some of them are at least, especially that malachite green, it has white in it, I guess. I suppose that all of the like pastel-y sort of tones in that set have white already mixed in, but because of that, it ends up creating kind of a chalky look to the background, and that is something that I really didn't want. I actually did end up putting a little bit too much water on my background, and because of that it helped to create this sort of really wet, chalky mess. So I do end up pulling quite a bit of that out in a moment. Basically, this is a tutorial that I am trying to teach you, but at the same time I am always learning, and I still make mistakes with pretty much every single one of my paintings, and it all just depends on how you deal with the mistakes that you make, I guess. So you can really embrace mistakes, and if you really don't like them, then you can lift them out like I did here. So as you can see, I added in a lot more of the really dark colour over the malachite that I put down, and then what I did is I waited for the background to nearly dry, so it was just very, very slightly wet, and then I added in the malachite on top, so that almost looked like little stars in the background, which was a way better effect than adding the malachite in when it was really, really wet and just watching that disperse into like this really ugly chalky look. But if you're using the more traditional like Western watercolours, you won't have this problem so much, I don't think. It's only because these colours are already pre-mixed, and they can just, I think Kuretake themselves only recommend for you to mix no more than 2 colours together. So that says it all, I think. They're just totally different to a normal watercolour. They look and feel very, very different. So you can see I just added in that malachite green then into the background, and I did wait for it to dry quite a lot, and now my background is completely dry. So I wanted to wait for it to completely dry before I went in with this star, because I could just see it going horribly wrong. And yeah, so this is what it looks like. Still a little bit of a chalky effect to the background, but I think that's just these paints in general. They are very vibrant and lovely, but I do find when the darker colours dry, they can go a little bit chalky sometimes. So I wanted to add a little bit more of the malachite colour into this painting, just to make sure that I matched my colour palette nicely. I originally wanted to paint the stars red, but then I thought, no, we'll go for the green, and then that really adds into the background. So before we go in with our final details, I'm just getting my kneaded eraser and erasing some of the pencil lines that are left on my bauble. And now I'm going to embellish it. So I looked on Pinterest for some ideas on how I could jazz my bauble up a little bit, and I decided to go for this little teardrop or petal shape using my red paint, because I thought the red is the nicest colour on here, I think, and I just wanted to add a little bit more of it. So once this dries in a little while, I'll probably add a little bit of gold to that, and I hope you're ready for some dots, because in a moment I shall be adding lots and lots of dots. I seem to be a bit dot obsessed at the moment, and I am adding them into everything I do, and I don't even know why. I just really enjoy it, and I kind of feel like it's a bit of a weird thing to enjoy, just sitting for ages and drawing dots on everything, but I don't know, you can't control what you enjoy, can you? One thing that I think can be a little bit difficult with watercolours is just knowing what consistency to use with them and how much water and paint to have on your brush, etc, etc. I'll talk about this a lot more in a future video, I think, but for now, just keep in mind that when you're doing this style where you're leaving the white space in between your elements, or even if you've done what I've done and added in a little bit of paint on top of your already dried bauble, just be aware not to use too much water on your brush and use more paint instead of the water, because you can get like a blob, basically a blob of water on your painting, and sometimes that can be really, really annoying. So now I've got my favourite and go-to pens for mark making to finish off this painting. I'm starting off with some gold dots on all the red parts of this bauble. I also use the gold to create a little bit of a swirly line going up for the string. I use the burnt sienna for that part, and you can't really see the gold very well on there, but that doesn't matter. I just thought, you know how usually Christmas baubles are hung on the tree and they have like gold strings, don't they? And the little top bit that's connected to the bauble itself is gold. So I probably could have done that gold and it might have looked a little bit better, but hindsight is a wonderful thing. The exact pens here that I really love for my mark making are the Artex gel pens. I really love those, the gold, silver and white, but I mostly use the gold and the white. I've got my micron fine liner here. The 0.5 tip is my favourite. I use that all of the time, along with all of my other size micron pens actually, but this is probably my most used one, along with the 0.8 as well. I love that one too. And I am also going to use my Posca pen for the dots. I do find the Posca pen to be really nice and consistent to create nice, even white dots. And that would be the 0.7mm bullet shaped tip or nib on the Posca pen. So basically, I just carry on going until I feel like I'm finished. All of a sudden, with painting sort of abstracts like this, or with any art, I guess, I suppose if you're watching this, then you'll know yourself that all of a sudden there becomes a time when you just feel like you're finished with a painting. And when you feel like that, it's usually a good time to stop, because more than one time I have absolutely overworked something and then thought, I wish I just would have stopped when I felt that feeling 10-15 minutes ago, when I thought maybe I should stop now. But I didn't stop. So then after that point you can really end up ruining something, or perhaps other people might not think you've ruined it, but for yourself then you might think like, oh, I feel like I've really ruined this now. I wish I just would have stopped a few minutes ago. But I'm using my Posca pen here now just to go around the edges of my bauble, just to sort of crisp up those lines a little bit, but I don't really end up crisping them up, and instead I make them look a little bit more wonky than they did before. But that's also absolutely fine. The Posca pens are another one where you have to be careful to not end up with a big blob on your paper. So I've done this plenty of times, and I've done the little pumping motion on my paper a bit, and then I've ended up with a great big blob on there, and I think, why the hell did I just do that? So I definitely recommend to, 1, not open the lid of your Posca pen over the top of your painting. Don't pump your pen on your painting, and also don't shake your pen without the lid on over the top of your painting. All learned from experience, and all absolute rookie mistakes on my part. So I had a bit of a shaky hand with my Posca pen a moment ago, and I accidentally covered up my burnt sienna line in the little zigzag line there, so I just added in a little bit more paint just to put that back in there a bit. And now I'm going to go in with my final thing, and that is adding dots all over the background. And the way I'm doing this is, and this is a way I sort of talk about with a lot of my watercolour paintings, is I let the paint tell me where to put the dots. So what I mean by that is I'm looking at the background, I'm looking where all the lightest areas are, and that is where I'm going to add my dots. I just feel like by doing this it kind of adds like the extra added depth to it, if you like. So the lightest areas all have the dots, and that makes the darker area look way more darker, and it just adds a little bit more interest to it, to me. And I guess it's just the way I enjoy doing things. You could also mix it up a little bit and add some bigger dots and then some smaller dots closer to your bauble, but I just added in the same size dot all the way around. I think usually I add in the dots to the darkest area, but I seem to have switched that up in this painting. And this might be an incredibly boring thing for you to do. Another good thing to do with this would be to splatter some paint onto the background. So you could use a toothbrush, or an old sort of scraggly watercolour brush is a really good way to do it. And you could use some gouache or some ink, and you could create stars that way if this was the look that you were going for. Acrylic paints would also work really well to splatter in some stars. If you wanted to go for like more of a galaxy night style kind of look, then the splattering of the stars would actually make it look a lot more kind of like a realistic galaxy than what mine does here. But that's okay, it's all in the name of abstract. And also the abstract word is a really great way to make an excuse for anything that you don't really like. Because if anybody says anything, then you can just say, well, it's abstract, so, you know. So now we are at the end of our painting, and it's time to do the most satisfying thing of all, and that is taking away the tape. I love this part so much because even though you might think something's finished, you can never really know if it's actually finished or not until you take away that tape and see what it looks like. I just love having the white borders around my paintings, and especially when it's got such a dark background like this. So now I've got two really lovely Christmas paintings in my sketchbook, and they are both tutorials. I hope you have enjoyed this one, and it might have been a little bit difficult to follow along with because I'm still learning how to do this tutorial thing, and I know I've got a long way to go with it, but let me know what you thought, and if you've got any suggestions for me on how I can improve at making videos like this. And yeah, I just hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have learned something. So I'll be back next week with another video, and yeah, it'll be something a little bit different next week, so I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and if you share any of your paintings done with this one online or on Instagram for instance, then don't forget to tag me. I'll leave my Instagram down below in the description and you can find me there. Okay guys, take care, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!